What's up, party people? Happy April Fool's Day, where every year I bring you a record, tape, or CD that's, like a little bit crazy, a little bit offbeat, maybe not a full-on novelty record, maybe not a full-on comedy record, but something a little, fitting for April Fool's Day. And that's certainly the case this year. Although, actually, I was all set to do a completely different video. I had the records out. I was all set to talk about it. And as I'm setting up, I'm like, oh crap, April Fool's Day is 2 days away. It just totally kind of sprung up on me this year. But fortunately, I had already an idea of what to talk about. So flipping around, I got another video coming soon, which is going to wind up coming next because I'm doing today's video today. And today's video is, so not really, it's hard to say how much of a novelty record this is. It is a kid rapper, and that alone, was sort of a novelty. The whole kind of gimmick of being Scarface could point to little Tulo and say, hey, look, he's just like me, but he's little, 5, 3 foot tall little kid rapper, but he raps like me. Isn't that crazy? Isn't that novel? And, certainly some early kid rappers, they had that one kid, I'm only 8 years old. That was the name of his song.
Bust it! Hit me! I'm only 9. 9, baby. 9, baby. 9, baby. 9 years old. You suck AMC. Here's my line. I'm T.O. Moore and I'm only 9. Well, I'm coming down. I'm so smooth. When the people see me, they better move.
So that was definitely a novelty record, Raven Simone being the youngest kid rapper and also being, the kid from the Cosby Show and all, that's a novelty gimmick. But then you look at someone like Shaheem and certainly, okay, still a teenager, but, especially when he first came out, but that's someone who you would say, all right, well, I would listen to him or his music, whatever his age was, his age is immaterial. In fact, it helps, obviously, he has Wu-Tang Clan people producing, writing for him and completely nurturing him and fostering him as an artist. But, hell, you could say, Special Ed, the youngest in charge, Kwame the Boy Genius, they were teenagers when they started in their first albums. But this kid is definitely more on the preteen side, so more of a gimmick in that sense. And then the other sense, which I don't know, because there's very little known about this artist. In fact, none of her music has ever been released before. You're only going to get to hear it because I dug it up on an obscure tape, which I'm going to get to that story. So I'm talking about a rapper named Munchie from Oakland, California. She was 13 years old, and she was going to have a full album out on Perspective, Peace Street specifically, Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis's label, but it got scrapped, but apparently it was finished because there's an article, which is basically the way almost anybody knows about Munchie at all. There's an article in Billboard magazine in 1995 that said her self-titled debut album is set to release in April, and that was a March issue, so it had to have already been finished and completely recorded. But it's scrapped. It never came out. There was no... I went back and looked at my old issues of The Source and all. There was no advertisements. There was no review, because a lot of times reviews would come out a couple months early. So her name is Munchie. Like I said, she's already a kid rapper. She's 13, and I don't know if she's also... if she's a novelty act because she's meant to be sort of like the Fat Boys, where she's always rapping and mentioning, food. Obviously the name Munchie. The one song we've got from her, which is called Give It Up, is full of food references. She'll, every line, she's even in the introduction to the song, she's like, hey, I'm starving for some fat beets. What's on the menu? Which, okay, that's, a generic phrase kind of anybody could use, but that's also 2 references to eating. But then, she'll talk about grandma's chicken and apple pie, in her verses. Again, it's just one song. Lyrically, ostensibly, is about nothing. It's just sort of a flexing song. It uses instrumentally Parliament's Flashlight. So there are a lot of old school 70s funk references in the hook. In some of her lines, she'll mention Double Dutch Bus and stuff like that. She's saying, hey, look, this is a throwback to the 70s. That's what the intro's about. In fact, let's dial it back a little bit. So Munchie, again, 13-year-old artist on P Street Records who never came out. If you look her up on Discogs, so I've tried to research everything I can, there is an entry, not for this song or her Lost album or anything like that, but she's credited as a production assistant for Auto and Cherokee. And now, Auto and Cherokee did come out in the early 90s, 92, 93. They had an album. Their biggest thing was they had a song on Alicia Silverstone movie, The Babysitter, where she's like a crazy babysitter, and their song was on that soundtrack. And that was kind of their biggest thing. They only had the one album, the one single, and then they broke up. Although Cherokee went on and stayed being like an R&B singer, and probably her biggest thing actually is doing a song with Andre 3000 like years later. But they were one of those groups who were like models and singers, and they played guitars, and maybe they sort of rapped a little bit. Like I heard their album back in the day, like they used to be on like Video Soul. They had a single, and I remember hating it. Like it was like it wasn't even like an R&B group. It was sort of like, New Jack Swing, rock and roll. Like again, it was kind of heavy on their ability to play guitars and stuff, and it was just like it felt like if you had a sitcom on BET in the 90s, like they could have done the theme song for it. Like that's what struck me about their music. But they did produce and do music for a lot of other artists at that time, including an R&B/reggae singer named Rajane, and that's why Munchie has a credit. She has a credit as production assistant on 2 songs, and you read her bio on Discog, it says like production assistant for Otto and Cherokee. I don't think that's really terribly accurate. I mean, I don't think, like those credits do appear in the Rajane liner notes, so I'm not saying that's wrong, but like I don't think that was her job, that was her career. Like they write it like that's her whole bio, production assistant for Otto and Cherokee. I think they, Otto and Cherokee were producing and managing her. They're all over this song. Presumably they did her whole album, although we'll never really know, or maybe someday we will, but we don't know today. And I suspect they just brought her in as like a protege, like, come on in, come and see how the business works, sit in the studio while we record here, and then you can get a sense of, what's going to be like when it's time for you to record your album in a few months. Which is to say, like, I don't doubt that she actually, had a legitimate, influence on the songs, Rajane's 2 songs. Like, maybe she really did say, hey, let's use a sample and punch it up, and they had to do some work in the studio, and she had, like, a legitimate contribution. I'm not whitewashing that. I'm just saying, I don't think that was, like, a staff job that they hired her for at 13. No, I think she was probably in the studio again because she was working with them and they were, working with her more directly. And so anyway, who she really is, not really sort of the production system of Otto and Cherokee, but a 13-year-old kid rapper who was going to come out on Perspective/P Street Records. So again, though, her identity is pretty puzzling because there's no photos, there's no nothing. We know she's a 13-year-old from Oakland just because Billboard tells us that. And I know what her song sounds like because I've heard her one song. It's called, again, Give It Up, and we'll hear it a little bit later. And okay, we'll get into this. Here's what's on a Perspective sampler tape that I dug up. I collected this, I don't know, years ago, but I was getting it for like the unreleased Young Z stuff. It's also got Almighty Arrogant on here. It's got Pudgy, one of the songs from his unreleased second album. Well, it's since been released by like 90 Street Tapes, I think it was. They put it out decades later, but it had been on release in the 90s. In fact, the Outside of skit that's on here, the Young Z skit, you hear on the Musical Meltdown release that came out on Gentleman's Release Records. And when I say you hear it from this tape, I mean you hear it from this very copy of this tape that I provided from this tape. It's ripped from this tape, it's remastered, and it was put out by Gentleman's Release Records. So that's what this tape is. And it also has Munchie, Give It Up. So again, I can't say for sure if she's really meant to be like a female of the Fat Boys. I mean, there was a group called the Fat Girls in the 80s, but like if that was the gimmick that was intended for her, besides being a kiddie rapper, that she's also, her name's Munchie. Like I said, she talks about food on here all the time. She references Aunt Jemima. She talks about apples a lot, although, okay, let's get into that. She calls herself the Apple Child like 4 or 5 times throughout the song at different points, including on the hook. And then she references apples at other points throughout the song. She says, I make up the juice. It's the applesauce. And at the end, she says, like, hey, anybody got an apple? Like at the end of the song. And Otto and Cherokee, who I talked about, their voices are also on the song. They do the hook. They do little short mini verses at times. And in that point, Cherokee calls herself the Apple Child. So I don't know what that's about. And listen, I'm a purely hip hop guy, but I have like Parliament tapes. Apple Child, I don't think that's like a classic 70s P-Funk reference or anything. I don't think George Clinton was ever talking about the Apple Child. Like, it's not like Sir Nose devoid of funk or something. Like, that's not a character they were doing. As far as I know, Apple Child is relevant to nothing. But maybe if we heard her whole album, it would make more sense. Maybe there's an intro to the album where she talks about it. Maybe it comes up at different points. Maybe, if you saw the album cover, she's got a big giant apple costume she wears or something. I don't know. But that's one thing. So is that tied to her being Munchie? I don't know. It's a strange reference that just keeps coming up in this one song called Give It To Me. Which, like I say, isn't really about anything. It's sort of about, just sort of flexing skills. It's lots of food references, but not actually about food. And it's sort of about rocking over a 70s Parliament track. And let's say it's a great sample. Of course, it's been used a bajillion times from everybody from like Digital Underground to like I think Chunk used it on the same album like 6 times. Like it's this classic, fundamental, classic breakbeat. Everybody uses it. This uses a lot more than like the drums. This uses basically the whole loop, the whole classic samples and instrumentation and everything. And when they sing the hook, it's in the style of Flashlight and all that. And honestly, like once X-Clan did it in 1990, you could have retired it. Because nobody's ever going to top, an X-Clan P-Funk sample. But, so this came out a few years later. It's just one more of many samples of, Parliament Flashlight. But none of that seems to be tied to her identity. Unlike the Apple Kid stuff. And also then the other question it raises is Munchie tied to the movie? Because, okay, there was a movie originally in 1992 called Munchie, which is sort of a kid's movie. Starred like Lonnie Anderson and Andrew Stevens. And that was like ostensibly a sequel to an 80s movie called Munchies. That was like a Roger Corman movie. It was a Gremlins knockoff. When they used to have like critters and ghoulies and hobgoblins and all those movies. Munchies, plural, was one of them. And there were these little like 8-inch furry creatures or something that ran around and wreaked havoc just like the Gremlins. But then Munchie came in the 90s and it was an official sequel, but otherwise there's no connection. Munchie, the creature, monster, whatever you want to call it, in Munchie, looks and acts nothing like the Munchies in the original movie. Now it's like a 3-foot-high thing with like a humanoid face, and it talks. It's actually voiced by Dom DeLuise. This is a kid's movie where he's like a little strange, like hobbit creature that helps out a small child in his like school life and stuff. So it's that kind of movie. So it's technically a sequel to Munchies, but nothing to do with Munchies. And so that came out in 1992. Which, again, it's still a couple of years before the rapper Munchie, 1995. But in 1994, the sequel, Munchie Strikes Back, came out. So that would have been right, relevant when Munchie was coming up with her rapper name or identity. The album's going to come out early 95. So, she was a kid again. She was 13, so maybe 12, back when they were recording the album. And finessing her as an artist. So it seems plausible that maybe she looked at this goofy kids movie on the shelf at Blockbuster and said, "That's me, I'm going to be Munchie." I don't know. It's probably not, but it does seem sort of unfortunate that her name evokes that creature. Like, I'll show you a picture of it. And again, now in 2023, that seems like a deep cut, a long reach. But that would have been, like when Munchie was coming out with her album, Munchie would have been there on the video show herself. So I don't know. Or maybe she's just saying she has Munchausen syndrome, right? Who knows? I don't know why. But I would assume Munchie is meant to be sort of a reference. Like, let's face it, lots and lots of overweight rappers put that into their name and their identity. Even if they weren't necessarily like the Fat Boys, where like we rap about food a lot of times. It would be like, Chub Rock, Notorious B.I.G., Overweight Pooch is a sort of a particularly unflattering one, but there's tons of them. Like, it was just a thing to do, and it, Arsenio Hall parried it when he did Chunky A. So maybe that was what Munchie was meant to be. Listening to this song, I would not say it's a joke song. I would not say it's intended as a novelty rap song. I think you're meant to just get into this music and enjoy it on a purely musical level. It's certainly derivative of Flashlight, and I'm sure they're hoping, because she's a kid rapper and they're marketing towards a younger audience, they're probably hoping that they're not really familiar with Flashlight already. But anyway, it doesn't matter, because the album was scrapped. The album's gonna be self-titled, due out in April 95, never came out. All we have is the one song, which, and I have to say, Munchie, actually a pretty good rapper. Again, maybe her persona is goofy. Maybe she's stuck in a mediocre song with not the greatest production team. Maybe she's making all these weird references to the Apple Child, and who knows what that's about. But just her ability to ride the rhythm, she actually sounds pretty good. So it's kind of a shame this was the end of her career before it ever started. If she came back a couple of years, a little bit older, maybe with a harder sound, maybe, some more serious people behind her, maybe she could have had a real career. And who knows? Maybe we're going to find out, You know, this is Lauryn Hill before she was Lauryn Hill, right? Or someone else, some other really talented rapper, her secret buried past. I doubt it. But so anyway, listen to it, check it out. It's a fun song. I mean, like I said, it's derivative because a billion people have done Flashlight, but it still sounds great. She sounds good over it. It's a cool song. It's kind of a shame it never came out. But, you know, no great tragedy either. I'm sure this is not an album most of you guys would have sought out had you know, had it come out in 1995. But let's listen to it. Kind of a fun, crazy, weird story, mystery, anomaly for April Fool's Day. So, Munchie, give it up.
Give it up.
Yo, AC, what's on the menu today? I'm starving for some fat beats.
Yo, Munchie, check this fat groove out here. It's a P-Funk loop, you know
Yo,
what I'm saying?
Order, don't you think that may be a little bit before her time, though?
Yo, Cherokee, I know all about the P-Funk.
Word, your pal.
Yo, peep this chorus that I was working on. Tell me what y'all think about
All right,
this.
let me roll a tape and check it.